everybody. Before we jump into today's episode, we have two sponsors we want to say thank you to for supporting this show. The first one is Routine. You guys have heard me talk about Routine, honestly, back from the early days of the podcast, and it's still a product I use every single morning. They have a prompt for me here. I'm going to do a little impromptu on this ad read today because honestly, this is a product that I truly believe in. And so I'm just going to tell you guys exactly what I think and why. First and foremost, this is a stat that they shared, but when you sleep, you lose between a pound and a pound and a half of water. And most of that's just sweating while you sleep. I used to not know if that was actually true, to be honest. I felt like a pound to a pound and a half of water seemed like quite a bit while I slept. But the one thing I did constantly pay attention to when I started using Routine was just the fact that before using Routine, I always felt a little dehydrated in the morning. And I'm one of those people that when I get up really early usually. I work out. One of the first things I do is some form of fitness. It's just like what I do before everyone's awake. And so it's very easy for me to grab a coffee, pre-workout, an energy drink, something with caffeine in it, and just go. When I am good about using Routine, first, I basically they come in these little single serve packets. They contain half an organic lemon, a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, Himalayan sea salt, all 6 essential electrolytes, and they have no sugar in them at all. A lot of hydration products are going to have sugar. So one of the things about Routine that I love is that there's no sugar in there. So when I am good about doing this consistently, I will take one of those single serve packets, I'll throw it in my mixer bottle, and whether I also put in a pre-workout or something with caffeine or I just drink that separately, I try to drink that first. And the days I do that, I do genuinely feel hydrated and just have a different form of clarity all morning. A lot of people have tried to make their own homemade versions of Routine, right? You see people they take a shot of the apple cider vinegar, they put a little sea salt, a little lemon in a drink. This is essentially that, but in a product that you can take with you on the go, have it ready for you first thing in the morning. I know me personally, when I'm groggy rolling out of bed, the last thing I want to do is, squeeze a lemon, cut lemons up, go get the apple cider vinegar, find my sea salt. I just rip this packet open, throw it in my water, drink it, and it's good to go. You can try yours today. If you haven't tried it yet and you've been listening to this podcast for years, just try the damn Routine. Give it a shot. You can use code ShaneWhite30 and get 30% off your first order. So you get 30% off by using code ShaneWhite30 and go to yourroutine.com. To make it even easier, I've added the link to yourroutine.com in the show notes. So just click on the show notes for this episode, click on the link to yourroutine.com, and don't forget to use code ShaneWhite30. All right, guys, today's episode is also brought to you by NeuroRoast. Again, I'm going to go a little off script here. NeuroRoast is a product that I also came across during this year of 2023. They are a coffee company that's helping you optimize your brain function and overall well-being. This is another product that, to be honest with you, when I first started working with it, I was a little on the fence. I was like, do I really want to have mushrooms in my coffee? Well, folks, I will tell you, when I use NeuroRoast, one of the things that has stood out to me the most is I'll back up. People that know me know that I have way too much caffeine, typically. One of the things this year I've done a good job of is cutting out alcohol. Not completely, but predominantly, I don't touch a lot of alcohol anymore. What I think I've actually done the other way, though, is add a lot more caffeine. So I do definitely drink too much caffeine. That's something I need to work on next year, is just trying to minimize how much of that. But NeuroRoast is something that has actually helped me because of the way they've formulated their coffee. Like, unlike regular coffee, which is, still something I consume, but NeuroRoast specifically doesn't cause jitters or crashes. Mushroom coffee provides more balance and sustained energy, allowing you to stay focused and productive throughout the day. So the times I do use NeuroRoast, I'll be honest, I just don't feel that jittery, like, I'm jumping out of my chair or standing here at my desk jumping around feeling. So give NeuroRoast a try. They have some really good flavors. I'll be honest too, the two guys that started NeuroRoast are just really good dudes based out of New York, and they're hustling, and hopefully they can get some people to try NeuroRoast this holiday season by listening to this podcast. So for you folks who've been on the fence, I'm telling you, it tastes delicious. They've done a fantastic job of making this coffee not only be functional, but taste fantastic. And if you want to try NeuroRoast, you can use code ShaneWhite. So it's super simple, just ShaneWhite at checkout. you'll also get 30% off. So if you go to neuroroast.com, and once again, I have added that to the show notes. So just click into the show notes while you're listening to this episode. You can click on NeuroRoast link directly. Don't forget to use code just Shane White, and you'll get 30% off your order. Hope you guys love both these products. I'm trying to not only bring you guys products that I use, but that I believe in on the podcast. I'm not taking ad reads for any brands that I don't really believe in. So anyway, hope you guys love both those products, yourroutine.com and neuroroast.com. I've added those links to the show notes. I hope you guys love it. And I got an awesome guest coming up right after this. All right, everybody, back with another health-related podcast today. The last one I did on Whoop versus Aura was people liked it. People enjoyed it. So I'm pumped to keep bringing you these. For everyone listening on the last one, I think I was wearing a Whoop. I'm wearing an Aura today. I still cannot decide which one I'm going to stick with long term. If you ask my wife, she finds it to be one of the funniest things about me is that I'm overly obsessed with all these types of devices and things, and I'm switching all the time, which is a little bit counterintuitive to the point of those things. So take that with a grain of salt. Today, we are diving into another topic that over the last year and a half has become something I pay a lot of attention to. I think it's one of those topics that for a lot of folks, it's a little difficult to get started with. So I'm excited to dive in today to macro tracking and go a little bit into what macro tracking is. I'm sure most of you that listen to this podcast have heard of macro tracking. Doesn't necessarily mean you know what it is, which is todally fine. That's the whole point of today's podcast. But I'll also try to explain what I've learned through the process of using a few different apps, what I focus on, what I don't focus on. I'll also add some links to the show notes where you can get started. I think the most complicated thing when it comes to getting started with macro tracking for most folks is even understanding, okay, great, how many calories, how many grams of protein, how many grams of carbs, how many grams of fat should I start with? Which ultimately, that's the most important question. And for a lot of people, that is the most difficult question to answer. So this is a fun one for me. This is something I've gotten really passionate about. So I'm going to back up. I used to do what I would call, this is the term for it, I used to do something that was called intuitive eating. Intuitive eating is really you pick a certain type of food products, most likely. So it could be a set of things you're allowed to eat and not allowed to eat. And then you just are allowed to eat as much or as little as you want. And the goal of that is to really start to dial in, okay, I know when I'm getting full, so I don't eat more than that. I did that for a while. And what that did do for me was help me clean up my diet. And so in the simplest terms, it certainly did help me take a lot of options off of my plate, which is a good thing. It helped me. It's very overwhelming, I think, if you just jump into macro tracking and you can still eat anything and everything. And now you're trying to keep track of it. And if you don't have a North Star goal, whether that's calories, protein, carbs, whatever it may be, it does get a little complicated because you're just trying to throw a ton and hope you land right where you're supposed to. And that was always tough for me. So when I switched to doing intuitive eating, and actually I did intuitive eating before I really gave macro tracking a hard try. And I would say I was doing intuitive eating. If you guys have listened to this podcast for a while, I used to do something called anabolic fasting, which I think I've actually talked about on here. It's something Corey Gregory's kind of brought to life and made well known. And he has very specific fasting windows combined with specific things you do and don't eat during the day, and then a nightly routine. And so it just gets you into a really good cadence. That's a great place for, I think, people to start if you've just felt overwhelmed with all the information out there, whether it's macro tracking, what you can eat, what you can't eat, all that fun stuff. So that's a good place to start, even if macro tracking feels a little bit overwhelming to you. But I hope by the end of the podcast today, you at least have a little bit of a sense of how to simplify macro tracking and you give it a shot. Because I do ultimately think it's one of the better things you can do when it comes to gaining or trying to lose weight is macro tracking. So intuitive eating, like I said, the problem for me was I wasn't seeing aesthetic or weight related goals come to fruition. And I think there's some argument to why, if I talk to, different people that I've just mentioned on the podcast about it, they would probably have different folks who have different responses as to why that was the case. But the more and more I dove into it, I realized I really enjoyed those foods. So the foods that I switched to, I really, really enjoyed, which is great as far as sticking to the diet. But the downside of that is I would just eat a shit ton of it. I really would. I would eat a ridiculous amount of some of these foods at the sittings, especially after a fasting period when I was really hungry, and I would just dive in and eat a ton of it. So for me, I did that for I think about a year and a half. It was a long stretch of time, and I realized over that time that I really hadn't moved the needle that drastically. Maybe a little bit, maybe cleaned up from a overall weight perspective a bit, but in general, didn't move the needle too much. So I switched in I'm going to say RIP because the app I was using to start doing macro tracking, I argue was the best application out there. It was in beta. It was actually a friend of the podcast. He had started a company that the actual goal wasn't macro tracking, but it was a core component of it. And just the way they visualized it, the way they allowed you to add things quickly was fantastic. So David Melman, if you're listening to this, your company Amex, which I know is no longer running, that was life-changing for me. It really, really was. It really helped me simplify how to macro track. And I owe them a lot of credit to even figuring it out in the course of my life. So shout out to them. So that's not an option for you. So I don't want to spend any time on that. What I ultimately ended up going to, which I think transparently they've overcomplicated it a bit, but it's probably the most well-known, the highest downloaded macro tracking, calorie counting, whatever you want to call it, related app, which is MyFitnessPal. So that is what I use. I actually pay for the yearly subscription, so I get all of the premium features. The main thing is actually being able to count macros. They've done a sneaky little thing that if you don't pay for the app, you can't see grams of carbs, fat, and protein. So that's always a problem. So let's back it up really quick before we dive into how to macro track. The first thing I would do, I've had him on the podcast before, his workout programs, his diet recommendations, his newsletter, his social media. I give Marcus Philly a ton of credit. He is just one of those people who puts out amazing content, and what he actually talks about is super thorough and very well thought out. And I genuinely think he's a leading voice in this space. So give him a ton of credit here. He has got a free tool that I'll link in the show notes that is called, I think it's the FBB Macro Calculator. It's really, really simple and really cool. Basically, you can go to it. Again, it's a free tool. You fill out a couple different points of information. The key things are your age, your current weight, how much you're moving. So this is a question that you can play with the numbers a little bit, but you basically say how active or sedentary you are. And for most people, they think that getting up and spending an hour at the gym, but then they sit at a desk all day makes them an active person. And in reality, he does a good job in the app of actually breaking down where you sit in the spectrum. And for most people who listen to this, so that might resonate with you, you're actually a lot less active than you would think. So he goes through all these different things, and then he ultimately comes to, what's your goal? Are you trying to lose weight? Are you trying to maintain? Are you trying to add muscle? So put on weight. And you input all this into the calculator, and it does actually spit out, depending on how aggressive or just baseline. So basically, it gives you within a range of, if you want to, let's say lose weight, because probably most people, when they start macro tracking, that's their goal. If your goal is to lose weight, his calculator will do one of two things. It'll ask you how aggressive you want to be. So if you want to be really aggressive, it'll have you really cut calories quick. And he recommends that you only stick to that for a short window of time. So maybe a 4-week, 6-week, 8-week max time period where you're really, really, really focused on trimming fat. And then he's got like a less aggressive version, which is not quite as few calories, which allows you to still be in a deficit. So anyway, go to that, fill that out. That'll at least give you the numbers to start with. And what I tell everyone that's ever asked me, those numbers might not be 100% correct. Don't get worked up about that. The main point is to start there, because I think that's it's an incredible place to start. And he does such a good job of getting you to the starting line. Start to actually track everything. That is the key here. Track everything. Put it into MyFitnessPal. Attempt to hit the numbers that he lays out. And look at the scale. Look at how you feel. And if you feel like you're not losing weight as fast as you should, then you need to change one of the inputs in that model. And most likely, you need to cut more calories. On the flip side, if you're trying to, gain weight, do the same thing. Use your own body as a test here and see what happens when you run with those numbers. And don't think that there's going to be a 1-week trend here and it's going to solve all your problems. You're going to hit all your goals. Give this 3 weeks, 4 weeks of consistently hitting it. I can guarantee you from my own personal experience that in the first week, the first 2 weeks, probably the first 3 weeks, you're going to have multiple times where you either forget to log things since you're trying to catch up, and you realize if you screw up one day, all of a sudden your trend in your charts in MyFitnessPal doesn't look as clean. You can't understand if you're really hitting your calorie goals. So just getting used to tracking is a big first step. And then number two, I think for most people who've never macro tracked, when you eat out, that is actually the hardest part. That's the hardest part to quantify. And I can probably do an entire other episode about how I do that. At its simplest form though, I always, if it's a restaurant where you can find their menu online, I'll go look there. If it's somewhere that's like a chain, you usually can actually look that up and find out how many calories are in things. The goal is, in my opinion, to overestimate. So I'll give you an example. If I'm going to go to a Mexican restaurant, I'm going to overestimate how many calories I think the tacos I'm going to have, the chips, the guac, whatever it is going to be on my plate. I will overestimate that in the app. The beauty of that is hopefully you come in under and you get the benefit of that. And this is if you're trying to lose weight. And on the flip side, that way you don't under record how much you're going to eat at that meal and end up eating a lot of food in other places. Another hack I love to use is if I know, and this is where me and my wife have done, try to change this habit a lot. We try to make the plan that we're going to eat out or pick up food or whatever it may be the morning of. So the hack here is if I know I'm going to go pick up Mexican food tonight for date night, I will start the day by logging the dinner. So I'll actually log a conservative dinner portion for my macros first thing in the morning. Well, what does that do? Why is that beneficial? It then backs in the rest of your day to be able to see how many calories and where you're going to have some holes in your macros to start the day. So for example, if I know this meal at night is going to be 1,000 calories, well, if my daily caloric max is 2,500 calories, I just took 1,000 off the board. I only have 1,500 calories to eat the rest of the day. And then on top of it, how much protein, like for me, protein's the main focus. So if I know how much protein roughly I can expect to get in that dinner, and I know how many calories I have left, I can quickly figure out what foods will fit in the rest of my day to hit my protein goal and stay under my calorie goal. So these are just little hacks, a little game that I've gotten used to that have become a normal part of my day. That when I first started, that was the hardest part. I would think I was eating clean all day. I would think I'm on track to hit my macros. And then we decide, hey, we're going to go pick up something different than we originally planned. Then I log it and I'm like, shit, I went 1,000 calories over my day. And that can really, really throw off progress if you do that too much. So that was a little bit of a tangent on some hacks that I do. But seriously, go to the calculator that Marcus Philly puts out for free. Get your numbers. The big things I would tell anyone to start, figure out and again, I'm talking in terms of losing weight. If you want to gain weight, you just got to kind of pivot everything I'm saying to think about you need more calories to be in a surplus. But macro tracking in its basics, you always are trying to understand your calories, and then from your calories, how many grams of protein, carbs, and fats you need in a day. And I was just telling my dad this last night. We were talking about how calories work. And if you take 1 gram of protein, that equals 4 calories. If you take 1 gram of a carb, that's also 4 calories. If you take 1 gram of a fat, that's 9 calories. So 1 gram of fat comparatively to a protein and a carb is more than 2 times the calories. So when you have a high fat item, typically the caloric density of that is going to be higher. I say all that to say you'll start to understand this math really well as you start to look at different food items you eat. You'll start to do the math to say, hey, something's 300 calories, but it only has this much protein. Oh, so the rest of that has to come from carbs and fat. And you look at the back of the package and you'll start to quickly realize, oh, that's a lot of carbs, or that's a lot of fat, or that's a lot of protein in that item versus other things I eat. Again, this is all trial and error in my experience. But I tell people who are trying to lose weight using macro tracking, there's 2 numbers that I would keep in your head and use the app every day, all day. You want to have a calorie ceiling, and I'll explain all this in a second, but just remember this phrase. You want to have a calorie ceiling and a protein floor every day. If you just start with that, I can almost certainly guarantee you're going to see success if you stick to that for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, even more. And what I mean by that is, for me, I'll give you the rundown of my calorie ceiling, my protein floor right now. I weigh roughly 165 pounds, give or take a pound up or down any given day. So 165 pounds. I'm trying to put on muscle, but also I'm trying to stay at a baseline maintenance calories. So I'm actually not trying to lose any more weight right now, but I also don't want to put on a ton of weight. The weight I do put on, I want to come in the form of muscle which there's a whole argument here, and we could go down a whole rabbit hole of what I should be eating and what I shouldn't be eating. But to keep it simple, I weigh 165 pounds, and most folks who live in this space would say you should try to get at least 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. So people would say I need to get 165 grams of protein a day to keep my muscle mass and stay in maintenance mode. I actually go for 185. So 20 grams more than that is my daily floor. So what I try to do is get 85 grams of protein, but do that and stay at or below 2,500 calories in a day. Now, given I'm in maintenance mode and I'm trying to put on muscle and not lose weight, if I go a little bit over 2,500 calories, it's not the end of the world for me, because if I put on a little bit of weight, that's okay. But knowing that I have that calorie ceiling and the protein floor, so I have to have a minimum of the grams of protein and I have a maximum on the calories, it allows you to really play with what types of foods you can fit in there. So let me just run you through, for me, what's a normal day. Usually get up, sometimes I have a protein coffee, so like a scoop of protein powder in a coffee. I have usually 4 eggs and 2 egg whites. Sometimes it's like sausage we get from Costco, and sometimes like an Oiko's like Greek yogurt. All of that I'm going to pull up yesterday for me, and I have been bad at tracking today. That for me alone is over 40 grams of protein. That's actually more like 55 grams. It's a ton of protein. I have Factor for lunch and dinner. And then so usually what's left for me is trying to get more protein without having something super high in calories. So sometimes I'll have a high protein bar. I'll have meat products, meat sticks, jerkies, those types of things are great. I have to pick and choose what fits in there. So I've thrown a lot at you guys today, but I think the main takeaways that I would love for you all to feel like you walk away and learn from today would be to get something like MyFitnessPal. Download that. I'd pay for the premium to get started so you can look at grams of protein. I would then go to Marcus Philly's protein calculator and figure out, depending on your goal, what your calories and macros should look like. From there, I would isolate out of all that information he gives what your calorie ceiling is and your protein floor is, and then religiously start tracking. If you do those steps, those 4 main steps, you will know, first of all, you'll start to understand from the food you eat, the things you drink, where the calories are coming from and what things are adding to your protein goals, what things aren't. If you want to start focusing on carbs and fats, that's also great, but really start with protein. Be religious with this. Start tracking it. Keep an eye on things. Overestimate when you eat out. That's my big hack as well. Overestimate when you eat out so that you're left with less and you have to be more diligent about getting healthier, higher protein options with what's left. And let me know what you think. If people are interested in this, that's really just touching the surface, giving you kind of the 30,000 foot view, the important nuggets to get started. There's always going to be little caveats, little things that you'll learn with different items you eat. I think for most people, the eating out piece is the hardest. So like I said, go back and listen to that part of the podcast and just overestimate. And ultimately, best of luck. I think if you start doing this today, as you listen to this, it'll take a couple of weeks to kind of get in the rhythm, make sure you're actually tracking everything, figuring out how to hit your numbers. And once you do, you'll start to get a short list of food and beverage items that can fit and can't fit into your daily routine. And then you'll start to get habitual. Like me, I eat my daily diet is so simple and so dialed in and so repetitive, but I like everything I eat and drink. So remember that, keep it simple, and let me know what you think. I hope this helps some people. And if you're trying to lose weight, you're trying to put on weight, I hope this does help you kind of move that in the right direction and hopefully ultimately helps you. All right. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back soon.